Imagine an army that wasn't real, tanks made of rubber, soldiers made of sound, and entire divisions that existed only as shadows. Yet this phantom force managed to trick Adolf Hitler's war machine, shaping the outcome of World War II. This isn't science fiction, it's the untold story of America's ghost army. The secret begins. World War II was unlike any conflict humanity had ever faced. Battles raged across continents, nations rose and fell, and the fate of the world hung in the balance. But hidden among the thunder of artillery and the clash of armies was something almost unbelievable, an invisible weapon that didn't fire bullets or drop bombs. It was called the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, though history would later remember them by a more chilling name, the Ghost Army. This unit wasn't made up of hardened soldiers or seasoned generals. Instead, it was filled with artists, sound engineers, stage designers, and painters. Young men who, before the war, had studied at art schools, played with sound recording equipment, or sketched portraits. Now, they were drafted not to fight with rifles, but to wage war with deception. Why such a strange army? To understand why this bizarre unit was created, we need to step back into the 1940s. The Allies faced a problem. Germany, under Hitler, had one of the most powerful and disciplined armies in history. Their blitzkrieg tactics had crushed France, ravaged Eastern Europe, and threatened Britain itself. To beat them, the Allies needed every advantage they could get, not just in firepower, but in psychology. Deception had always been a part of warfare. From ancient generals lighting extra campfires to make their forces look bigger, to Napoleon's use of misleading movements, the art of tricking an enemy was as old as war itself. But in World War II, technology and creativity allowed deception to reach an entirely new level. And so, the Allies asked themselves, what if we could build an army that wasn't real, and convince the Germans to chase shadows while our real soldiers struck somewhere else? Birth of the Ghost Army. In 1944, just before the D-Day invasion, the U.S. Army quietly assembled a new kind of unit. Officially, it was the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, made up of about 1,100 men. But their mission was far from ordinary. Instead of charging into combat, they would pretend to be entire divisions of the U.S. Army, sometimes as many as 30,000 men. Their job was to fool the Germans into thinking massive forces were positioned where, in reality, only a few ghostly actors stood. The men were recruited not for their physical strength, but for their creativity. Some were graduates of Yale, Pratt, and Cooper Union art schools. Others were engineers, advertising designers, or set builders from Hollywood. These were people who knew how to paint, design, and perform illusions. And now, they would turn those talents into weapons of war. The tools of deception. The Ghost Army had no real tanks or artillery. Instead, they used three main tools of deception. 1. Visual illusions, inflatable tanks and dummy equipment. The Ghost Army had massive rubber tanks, trucks, and artillery pieces. At first glance, they looked real, life-sized replicas painted with meticulous detail. From the sky, German reconnaissance planes saw what appeared to be powerful armored divisions. In reality, these tanks could be carried by just a few men. Soldiers would inflate them like giant balloons and arrange them in convincing formations. Along with tanks, they used fake airplanes, artillery, and even phony supply depots. Camouflage experts painted them to match real equipment, making them nearly impossible to distinguish from a distance. 2. Sound illusions, sonic warfare. The unit worked with sound engineers from Hollywood and Bell Labs to develop huge speakers mounted on trucks. These could blast pre-recorded sounds of tanks moving, artillery firing, or troops marching. The sounds carried for up to 15 miles, tricking German scouts into hearing a phantom army where none existed. Engineers carefully matched the sound effects to the terrain and time of day. At night, for example, they might play the rumble of convoys on a distant road, luring German spies into believing thousands of troops were advancing. 3. Radio deception, phantom communications. Every army division had its own unique radio fingerprint. The Ghost Army learned to mimic these patterns, transmitting fake messages that convinced the Germans they were listening to real units. Skilled operators created chatter, reports, and orders that sounded completely authentic. When all three techniques were combined, visual, audio, and radio, the illusion was almost impossible to detect. To the Germans, the Ghost Army looked, sounded, and communicated like a real fighting force. First deployments. The Ghost Army's first real mission came shortly after D-Day in 1944. The Allies had stormed the beaches of Normandy, but their position was still fragile. They needed every trick possible to keep the Germans guessing. The 23rd was sent to Normandy and later across France, staging elaborate deceptions. They inflated hundreds of tanks in open fields, moved them around to suggest troop movements, and blasted sound effects of armored divisions clanking through villages. In one mission, they created the illusion of a massive force preparing to cross a river. German scouts spotted the fake tanks and heard the rumble of engines. Believing the crossing was real, the Germans diverted their forces, only to find that the attack never came. The true Allied push happened miles away, with far less resistance thanks to the diversion. Life in the Phantom Army. For the young men of the Ghost Army, daily life was a surreal mix of danger and absurdity. They would spend hours inflating rubber tanks, sometimes under enemy fire. A stray bullet could deflate their equipment, exposing the illusion. In one case, local French villagers watched in confusion as soldiers lifted a Sherman tank into place with just a few hands. It looked like magic. But while there was humor, the stakes were deadly serious. These soldiers weren't just playing games. If the Germans ever discovered the truth, the Ghost Army could have been wiped out. They had almost no real weapons, just a handful of rifles for self-defense. Their survival depended entirely on secrecy. Keeping secrets. The Ghost Army's operations were top secret. The men were forbidden from talking about their missions, even to other soldiers. If captured, they were told to give only the cover story, that they were part of a regular engineering unit. Many of them carried sketchbooks, documenting their strange war with drawings of inflatable tanks and makeshift camps. But these sketches would remain hidden for decades. The very existence of the Ghost Army was classified until 1996, more than 50 years after the war. Early successes and growing confidence. By late 1944, the Ghost Army had carried out more than a dozen deception missions. Each time, they grew bolder. They would park fake tanks in fields, stage mock supply lines, and even paint fake patches on their uniforms to impersonate other divisions. Some soldiers acted as spoof officers, strutting into French towns, talking loudly in cafes about upcoming offensives, knowing that German spies were listening. In one instance, a group of Ghost Army soldiers entered a town, posing as members of a famous armored division. They spread rumors, asked locals about roads that could handle tanks, and created the impression that thousands of men were moving in. Within days, German intelligence reported the presence of the division, despite it being hundreds of miles away. The deception worked perfectly. A war of shadows. The Ghost Army's early operations proved one crucial truth: in war, what the enemy believes can be more powerful than what is actually there. By late 1944, Hitler's forces were stretched thin, desperate to hold back the Allied advance. The Ghost Army's Phantom divisions became a weapon of confusion. Every fake tank forced the Germans to waste resources. Every false radio signal diverted their troops. Every rumor planted in a village delayed their response. But the true test of the Ghost Army was still to come. As winter fell, the war entered one of its darkest and most dangerous phases, the Battle of the Bulge. It was here, in the frozen forests of Belgium, that the Ghost Army would face their most dangerous challenge yet.